And I just want to try and draw some threads together with this title, Managing Risk in Complex Megaprojects. I should tell you that we're making a recording of this presentation, so if you heckle too loudly, you might be recorded for posterity. If you don't want to be recorded, please just make a sign and we can shut the recording off at that moment. So can I just get a show of hands? How many people would say you are working on a complex mega project? Oh, good. I'm really pleased about that, because often you get people who come to these events which are focused on a particular type of project and they don't work in that type of project. But fortunately, for those of you who work on less complex, less mega projects, ordinary projects we might say, some of the principles and ideas that I want to share in this closing session are relevant to every project, managing risk on every project, whether it's high complexity or low complexity or just simple or complicated, or whether it is in fact a small or medium-sized project. So there are some principles which apply to all projects, but there are some things I particularly want to pick up, obviously, in this context of mega projects and thinking about infrastructure and the National Infrastructure Plan and some of those sorts of things. So let me start with this idea. Often, if you're given the task of either managing a complex mega project or being part of a complex mega project, the first thing you think is, good grief. Is that really true? Do I really have to do this? Mission impossible is the thought that often goes along with this, that it's something which is really, really difficult to do and quite hard to deliver. And there's a number of reasons for that, particularly in the context of complex mega projects. First of all, there is the issue of size, mega projects. The bigger a project is, the bigger its risks are likely to be, the more exposure there's likely to be, the more players there are likely to be involved, stakeholders and so on. And so that introduces more risk. We've got the issue of complexity in terms of the number of interactions, the ability to actually predict everything that's likely to happen in a systemic sense within a complex project, and that's where the idea of complexity comes from, or wicked or maybe even messy projects. And then we've got the issue of volatility, that the pace of change is accelerating and increasing. And if you're involved in a project which is volatile and large and complex, then you're entitled to think that maybe Mission Impossible is a reasonable description. I think Mission Impossible just leads us to a set of thoughts which you might find interesting and useful, because we've got the films to draw on, and if you're as old as me, then you might have the TV series as well. And both with the TV series and the film franchise, there's a number of features in the films which makes the Mission Impossible achievable. And I don't know about you, I quite enjoy some of these films, but these are the sorts of things you'll find as common factors in the Mission Impossible films. First of all, you've got Tom Cruise himself. You find heroic effort from a superstar professional. Obviously, he is the one who does the Mission Impossible and turns that into mission accomplished and actually makes it work through some kind of heroic acts and doing things that you never thought you would see him do. There's lots of high-level skills and technical support, both within the context of the film with the team that he has, but also in the context of making the film with all of the special effects and so on. Huge budgets, 650 million for the three first Mission Impossible films, massive investment. Amazing special effects. Things happen and you look at that and say, wow, how did they make that happen on screen? And then the thing that always surprises me with these films, it's just blooming lucky, aren't they? And an improbable level of good luck where things just turn out, with one bound our hero was free. And it seems that these are the sorts of things you find in the Mission Impossible films. And I just wonder if you recognise any of those things in your complex mega projects. That if you're the project manager or program manager or involved in the team, are you expected to be that heroic superstar professional with a high level of skills and technical support, a massive budget, special effects in terms of all sorts of extra whiz-bang things that happen on your project, and then just being really lucky? Is that your project? And those of you who work on complex mega projects, is that really your experience? Probably not. If it is, then you probably are the last one, improbably lucky. But luck does happen, of course. You can get lucky. There is a better solution to relying on these sorts of factors that you find in the Mission Impossible films, and that is to manage the risk. So we should have some way of approaching the uncertainty that you find in complex mega projects in a structured and intelligent and informed way which maximizes our chances of success. And that's what I'd like to talk about within this context. But if you've ever been involved in a Mission Impossible project, a complex mega project, you'll know that very often you get a scope statement, which is quite like what we used to see at the beginning of the TV series. And it went something. Deniability. That's a key factor in mega project leadership. No documentation and no accountability. And that's what we have. So I hope it isn't like that for you. And I'd like to suggest a way in which we can approach the risks in complex mega projects in a more structured way. So I've got 3 questions to start with. If we think about complex projects, and here I'm drawing on some of the work of the ICCPM, the International Centre for Complex Project Management. I don't know if we're allowed to mention that as an APM event, but I just did. They have a very strong risk research stream, and it's an organisation that's worth looking into and perhaps reading some of their research papers. Are complex projects different from any other project? And I think Egan perhaps alluded to this earlier on in his presentation. There's a difference between complicated and complex. And I like to use the picture of a bowl of spaghetti as opposed to origami. Origami is complicated. Complicated is where you have a number of different steps that you take to achieve a goal, and you could undo those steps and repeat them again. So it's entirely predictable. It might end up with a lot of steps and a lot of detailed elements, but if you could, let's say, take a motorbike engine and you break it apart into all its parts and you put it out on the bench, then you put them all back together again, exactly the same way, without any bits left over, which is my trick usually, and then it works. That's complicated. A motorbike engine is complicated because there are a number of components, but you follow the rules to deconstruct it and construct it again. It's just unfolding and refolding. And actually that comes from the Latin word or the Italian word complexum, or complictum really, it's the genitive, which means with folds. So if you fold something and refold it, that's complicated. Complex, the root word means knotted. And so I like the idea of a bowl of spaghetti where, you know, things are tangled up in there and you could pull it apart. You could take a strand of spaghetti out, but then you try and put it back again. That's just not possible. And if you try and put it back in exactly the same relationship to all the other parts, it really cannot be done. And if you pull one piece of spaghetti that's sticking out, you've no idea what else is going to move in that bowl. Because of the complex relationships, the interrelationships and interactions within that bowl of spaghetti, it is entirely unpredictable. And that's the difference between complex, knotted up, and complicated, folded in a way you can unfold and refold. So the characteristics of complex projects are that they are inherently, built into the way that they're structured, inherently ambiguous. That means that they are inherently unpredictable. There are things that we could not foresee in the way that complex projects behave because of the built-in ambiguity. And that's an important factor. So are complex projects different from ordinary projects? Yes, they are. Now, we're at a risk management event, so the next question is, do complex projects have different risks? Or are they just like ordinary project risks? We could take a risk breakdown structure from any project and apply it into a complex project. Well, the answer to this is kind of yes and no. There are typical standard project risks that complex projects are exposed to. You know, resource issues and scope issues and stakeholder issues and all of those sorts of things that supply chain issues and so on. They are exposed to standard, traditional, what we might call normal risks. But they're also exposed to emergent risks, and Jeremy mentioned this in his presentation earlier on. There's the typical risks, and we can see how they might or might not decay or change over the lifetime of our project or program. But then there's the emergent risks, the ones that we hadn't seen coming, the ones that weren't in the risk register, the ones that we hadn't got on our checklist and had no previous experience of, and they emerge. And emergent risks are a characteristic of complex projects because of the detailed interactions of the parts within the project, the way that the spaghetti sort of ties up against itself. You cannot tell what's going to come out later on when you twist your fork into that spaghetti. It's just not predictable. And so that means that there are emergent risks, emergent uncertainties that matter, both threats and opportunities, that are inherently unpredictable. And so here's the picture of the black swan, which we use as the kind of shorthand for risks that could have been foreseen but weren't. They're inherently unpredictable, but they appear to be obvious in hindsight, and they have improbably large or unexpectedly large impacts, as described by Nicholas Taleb in his book a few years ago. So they do have the same sort of standard project risks, but they also have these other types of risk which are different, risks which are not predictable, emergent risks. So yes, complex projects have different risks that they're exposed to. Does that mean that risk management needs to be different? Can these complex emergent risks on complex mega projects be managed? Well, of course we need traditional risk management to deal with typical risks. So where our complex mega project is exposed to the same types of risks that ordinary projects are, then we can apply the same type of approach to deal with them. But there needs to be a different approach to deal with emergent risks. And I'd like to suggest that futures thinking is part of the answer to that. And I'd like to describe what we mean by futures thinking. But it's a different way of putting yourself out there, putting your brain in the future. And we talked in one of the talks earlier on about pre-mortems. Was that you? Was it you? Somebody talked about pre-mortems, about Gary Klein's pre-mortems, imagining yourself at the end point and then looking back to say, well, how did I get here then, whether it's good or bad? And I think that's something important that we could think about. So we can manage traditional type risks on complex mega projects using traditional type risk management, but we can also manage emergent risks, the black swans, through futures thinking. So these are three important questions for us thinking about managing risk in complex mega projects. Complex projects are different. They are exposed to different types of risks, but those risks can be managed proactively. So we might want to think about how that could be done. What is futures thinking? It's a whole discipline. We can just simplify it to say this. There is a process. The first is to decide where you want to go. Obviously, you'll recognize some elements of a risk process in this, but you define your preferred future, or maybe preferred futures, a number of options you might have. This is where we want to get to, outcomes and objectives, outcomes and benefits from our complex mega project. If we don't know what that is, we can't even start. So this is our preferred future. This is what we're trying to get to. Then what we need to do is identify all possible futures and have a scan, some kind of future-based scan, which says what could happen apart from what we want to happen. So futures thinking is the way to define a range of different possible futures. Then we analyse those to decide which of those are probable. And then what we want to do once we know, well, this is where we're going, this is what could happen, these are the more likely ones within that field, then what we want to do is to manage the future to make our preferred future the most probable, or at least more probable. And there's a number of specific techniques that we can use around this preferred, possible and probable futures and so on. Particularly in the possible futures, the obvious thing is scenario planning, and that's been around for quite a long time, maybe 50 years through Shell, and other organisations have been leading the way in scenario planning approaches to think about what could happen. Let's imagine a number of different alternative ways that we could move forward. There's visualization techniques. I know Estelle's been involved in that as well. Thinking about using pictures and models to show how the future might unfold. We could think about different paths through the forest and through the desert and over the mountains and use those as scenario styles to envisage a future. The idea of horizon scanning and trend watching, just getting your feelers out there and seeing which way things are going. And there's a lot of great organizations that do this sort of thing. We talked about, we're watching in Davos, the World Economic Forum meeting, and they have a great environmental scanning trend watching program, which results in the Global Risks Report, which has just come out just recently. I happen to have an extract from it here, which I'm going to refer to a little bit later. You need to read this. It's only 50 pages. But, in terms of trend watching and knowing what's coming, these guys really have their finger on the pulse. And then there's more specific techniques. Field anomaly relaxation is a nice specific technique where you think about a number of different dimensions of the future, maybe 5 or 6 or 10 things that could happen. Then you combine them all in a number of different possible scenarios. So you could have rising China, the crash of South America, Trump's assassinated, and so all of these, or not. And then you look for the combinations and you relax the ones which are anomalous. So this couldn't happen if this also happens. But if this happens, it makes this more likely. And it results in a number of well-defined possible scenarios by defining the field, then looking for the anomalies and relaxing the anomalies to get to a feasible field. So these sorts of techniques are well developed. They've been out there. I've used some of these back in the 90s, I suppose, part of system dynamics thinking. So this is not new. These are well-developed techniques, and you can learn how to do them. So if you want to put that into a picture, I guess the first thing we need to do is to define our preferred future. Once we know where we're aiming at, we then do some sort of scan which says what could happen. And within the possible futures, we analyze those to produce a subset which are probable. Some of those possible futures are crazy and mad and would really probably not happen, but there are a subset which are probable. And then what we want to do is to do some sort of proactive management which moves our preferred future into that probable space if it isn't there already. And that's what futures thinking is trying to achieve. And risk management is essentially part of that. But it's not so easy. This guy has a future viewing apparatus at my disposal. I find it difficult to envision tomorrow. Curse my puny brain. That's supposed to be funny. Never mind. Perhaps I'll do it in an Irish accent. No. But, how do you envision, that stupid American word, envisage the future? Do we have any powerful future viewing apparatus? There is something, and it's risk management. Risk management is a forward-looking radar. The purpose of risk management is to scan the future. It's to say, what is out there coming in my direction that could affect me? The further out it is, the more fuzzy it's likely to be, less well-defined, but perhaps I can at least tell how big it is and whether it's good or bad and what direction and speed it's moving in. So I can track it on my radar. It might be a big bad thing, but it's moving away. It might be a small good thing, and it's moving towards me very fast. Once I have things identified on my forward scanning, my futures radar, the risk radar, then I can position myself to avoid the bad things and capture the good things. And that's what risk management is trying to do. It scans ahead to identify possible futures. This is coming our way. This is good. This is bad. It then analyzes the alternatives through our standard risk techniques to find which of those possibilities are probable, and then provides techniques for us to manage the future proactively. That's what we're doing in risk management. And Val told me, she stepped out actually, so she told me I would say the word future-proofing. And so because she said I was going to, I will. I wasn't going to, but it's about future-proofing. It's about seeing what could happen and getting ready for it in advance. That's what we do, isn't it, in risk management? And so we have this forward-looking radar. This is our way of managing the future proactively. This is the key to successful futures thinking when applied to managing complex megaprojects. Okay, are we all right? You with me so far? Really engaged? Okay. It's good, isn't it? End of the day. I could do my Michael McIntyre impression, couldn't I? But I won't. It doesn't work on the video. How do you manage the future proactively? Imagine that we're here now, and that's our point where we are. And if we look into the future, there's a range of things that could happen. And some will be good, and some will be brilliant, and some will be not so good, and some will be disastrous, and some of them we can't tell quite where they're going, and some will be kind of okay. There's a whole range of things that could happen. And so with our scanning, future-looking, forward-looking radar, we identify these sorts of things that could happen in the future at different times, of course. And that's what we do in our standard risk approach. Then what we do is we change the future. So we move from this now to another now. We move forward and we do some risk management. We identify the uncertainties that matter, good and bad. We identify effective risk responses to avoid or minimize or prepare for bad things, to exploit or capture or optimize or enhance the good things, and then we take action. And as a result of that, we change the future, which means that with the things that we previously identified as possible futures, some of them now are not possible. We've closed off some of those options by the actions that we took. So hopefully we've removed a disaster, or at least we've made it less bad. We've dropped out a bad one. Unfortunately, we might have also excluded a very good one. But our action will have changed the future. It will have removed some possibilities, and it will also have changed the likelihood or the size of other possibilities. This is what we're doing, isn't it? So we're affecting the future by the things we do now. But not only do we change previously identified possible futures, we also introduce new futures that weren't there until we took these actions. So we have emergent futures as a result of risk management. And there might be new disasters which we've introduced. These are secondary risks, aren't they? Secondary disasters and secondary benefits. And there might be a new brilliant option, which now by taking this action we've created. So what we do in risk management is we proactively change the future. The first thing is we scan the future and identify what's possible. We compare it with our preferred. Then we take action. We change the ones that were possible before, and we do our post-mitigation assessment and work out what that looks like. And we look to see what the effect of our responses are in introducing new possible futures. And we go round the cycle repeatedly to make sure that as we move forward in our project, whether it's a complex mega project or a simple small project, this is what we're doing. We know that's what we're doing, don't we, as risk people? Yeah, obviously. Yes. See, non-verbal is good. I can thank you for that. Spoken is even better. So how do we do that? How do we do this bit on here, change the future through managing risk? Well, for traditional risk management, we know how to do that. This is standard stuff. You've got the newly released PRAM guide, Project Risk Analysis and Management guide that was in your bags from APM. We've got the newly released PMI PMBOK guide with a new chapter 11, the risk management chapter. We've got ISO 31000, we've got management of risk. We've got lots of different descriptions of traditional risk management where we do the thing. We identify risks, we prioritize them, then for our threats, we either avoid them, transfer them, reduce or mitigate, or accept. And for opportunities, we exploit, capture, we share them, we enhance them, or we accept them with contingency plans. Standard stuff. What about emergent risks? This doesn't work when you don't know what's coming down the track. When something is emerging, which you haven't foreseen, which was unpredictable, which just comes at you from left field and is suddenly there in front of you, how do you take proactive action to avoid or transfer or exploit or enhance? How do we do that when we haven't foreseen it? It wasn't on the radar. That's what these emergent risks are. So we can't use the standard risk response strategies. They appear when it's too late. So does that mean there's nothing that we can do? That unpredictable or unknown means unmanageable? Well, fortunately not. This is where we need a different approach to deal with emergent risks. And I'd like to suggest that there is an approach we can use based on an existing a management technique that we use outside of the project environment. And that's business continuity management. Business continuity is saying, imagine something happens. I'm not sure, we're not going to say what that something is, but that something happens which has a major impact on our business. Let's say we lose all of our IT functionality. I'm not going to say how that could happen. It could happen with a terrorist attack or a fire, or it could be a major outage on the power grid, or it could be fraud or sabotage, or. But if something happened to our IT system, what would we do? And so we have a business continuity plan that says this is what we do in the event of something happening that leads us to this unwelcome outcome. Or we might say, what would we do if half our people couldn't come to work for an extended period of time, let's say a week or a month? And of course that could be a plague, it could be a major failure in the transport system, it could be a general strike, it could be, all sorts of things could happen. Whatever it is, what would we do if we lost half our people? And so we build a plan. And now I'd like to suggest we could have something called project continuity management. And what I'm drawing on here is some ideas that were in this global risk report that says we need a different approach for emergent risks. In the global risk report, there's two sort of thought leadership pieces, and one of them is called resilience in complex organizations. It's on page 54. And it says this: the World Economic Forum in 2012 began to take note of resilience. It created the Resilience Action Initiative, which resulted in a set of resilience tools and approaches informed by complexity theory but grounded in practice. These new resilience tools are intended to be used in addition to traditional risk management tools, not instead of them. Organisations will continue to face normal risks which require the traditional tools. It is systemic risks that require the new tools. And then they go on to describe 9 different types of emergent risks and the sorts of tools that we might use to deal with them. This is current thinking, but it's applied in the enterprise level or at the organisational level or even the societal and cultural and national level by the World Economic Forum. We need to apply this thinking into our projects, both complex mega projects and ordinary projects too. We need project continuity management that says if something happens, we don't want to say what that something is, but something emerges unexpectedly, this is what we're going to do. And there are 2 key risk response strategies which I'd like to suggest to you. One is flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking. This really is a person. You can kind of trace the arms and the legs if you look very carefully. Some sort of contortionist, I suppose. Or the chameleon that changes shape. The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. This idea that you can be flexible in the face of some kind of shock or deformation. Deformation, not defamation, yes. Deforming impact. So some big bad thing or some big good thing suddenly happens. What are we going to do? And we require flexibility to bend with it and bounce back. So that's one thing is flexibility. And the other is the word which was in the Global Risks Report, resilience. We're not after a sprint where we just fade out after a short period of time. Complex mega projects, all projects, life itself is a marathon. And so we need to be able to keep going to maintain our core purpose and integrity in the face of challenge. What is it we're aiming to do in our project, in our organisation, in our society or our nation? Something comes along to challenge it. How are we going to keep going? To maintain our core purpose and integrity. To regain our original shape after this thing has happened and to bounce back. This is my resilient pig, which I quite like. I got him on the Ponte Vecchio in where's the Ponte Vecchio? In Florence. And he's a nice little fat chap, but you sort of throw him and he splats, and then he just sort of, he splats into nothing like this, and then he just sort of comes back. Wonderful. It doesn't work so well on carpets, but that's what we want, is something happens, some big shock, and you go splat, and everything is like that, and then you just kind of, okay, I can cope with that, I'll reform. Or Mr. Bounce if you have children. Much more friendly. So here we have 2 strategies, flexibility and resilience, as ways of dealing with emergent risks that come up unexpectedly. So how do we implement those things? What does flexibility and resilience mean in practice? How do we build flexibility and resilience into our projects? The World Economic Forum Global Risks Report talks about it at national, corporate and organisational level. We're here concerned about projects. So what can we do to build flexibility and resilience into our projects? Now, Jeremy had something really good to say about HS2. I've stolen a copy of one of his slides here, which is actually illustrating exactly how this works. Would you please include this, responses to raise maturity, that slide? Is that one you can make available? So he's going to make some of his slides available. And here he's described 6 or 7 areas of potential problems: design, funding, integration, quality, and so on. And then he's described a number of responses to those challenges, which are not saying a specific thing happens, so we do that. He's talking about raising maturity, having a kind of capability in place which gives them the required flexibility and resilience to cope with challenges in each of these 7 areas. And so the things that are described on his slide, and the capability maturity model, which came from Oxford Side Business School, the same idea. We're building in resilience in benchmarking, in reference class forecasting, dealing with black swans and so on. And the responses are not to specific events. They are responses to the way that we organise ourselves and the way that we set up our project, the way that we engage our teams and our other stakeholders, the way that we actually monitor and report performance. These are types of integral responses to the way that we set up and run the project. And I guess Shell will probably be doing some of these things too. So I'd like to suggest some practical headings that we can use in our projects to build flexibility and resilience. In the project itself, it's essential that we know where we're headed. And we've said this over and over again today in lots of different sessions. If you don't know where you're going, any way will get you there. If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. We've got to have objectives, and we need to have clear objectives defined in a smart way, which deliver benefits and value to our shareholders and stakeholders. That's clear. That's really important. If our project doesn't have clear objectives, we cannot be resilient, because something hits us and then we forget where we're supposed to be aiming and we end up pointing somewhere else. So clearly, objectives are important. Risk budget and contingency, I've heard a session on that as well. Again, really important to understand the difference between the two, the risk budget for the known risks, the contingency for the unknown risks, one owned by the project team, the other owned by the organisation. The criteria for releasing those, that needs to be really clear to have flexibility and resilience when unexpected things happen. There needs to be something set aside, which is not just 20%, but is a real number that means something. Flexible processes where we're not required to go to a number of meetings and get a number of signatures and fill in a number of forms. But if there's something we could do in a different way, we can do that. And very strong change management, obviously. That needs to be a key part of our setup. As well as the project, we've got people-related issues. The team needs to be led well. The team needs to be empowered. They have objectives and they have resources and they have constraints. They need to meet the objectives using the resources within the constraints. And how they do it probably doesn't matter. If we have empowered teams, particularly on mega projects where they're quite often distributed, where there's technical specialisms, we need to let people do their thing, use their expertise and their experience to deliver their part of the project. So they need to be empowered. It's really important that we understand ourselves and other people, emotional literacy or emotional intelligence. And Ruth was talking about this a little bit in one of her sessions. So that we understand this is why I'm reacting like this, and if it's not appropriate, I can change it. This is why my other stakeholders are adopting this attitude to risk, and I understand the reasons, and I can help them to moderate their risk attitude in order to help us all achieve the same goal. Emotional literacy is a key part of flexibility and resilience, being able to understand and change. And if we can't do that for ourselves, we can't do it for other people. And positive attitudes, not moaning and griping, there goes something else has gone wrong on the project. I knew it was going to fail. I was just waiting for it all to go wrong. And I could have told you, okay, here's a challenge. What are we going to do about it? We're up for this. We're the best team for this job. We know what we're aiming at. We've got good leadership, good processes. Let's make it happen. And this is not the American sort of blind can-do. Who said she was going to put her pants on the outside? Was that you again? Yes, I was worried when you said that. No, I was waiting. The sort of the superhero idea, that's not what we're talking about here. It's about a realistic view that we can do this. Things are possible and we can make it happen with the right tools. So there are personal things. There are obviously technical issues that build technical flexibility and technical resilience into our solutions, design redundancy, as an example, the use of iterative development or prototyping, or interim releases, an agile or adaptive methodology, if you like. Some of those things can build technical redundancy in, making sure we deal with the high-risk elements first and so on. Then we've got the idea of contractual flexibility and resilience, not just boilerplate terms and conditions that you apply to every project, having something which is tailored to this particular challenge. We've seen in Heathrow Airport Terminal 5, in Crossrail, the Olympics, the strong and positive use of good, appropriate contractual terms, which have flexibility built into them, which allowed for the possibility of change, which had clearly specified allocated responsibilities for risks and for deliverables. and where that was clearly stated in the contract. The contract is an enabler, not a constrainer. It should be. So using the contract can help us to create flexibility and resilience. And finally, within the business, within the organisation, there are enablers of project continuity or of project flexibility and resilience, which include our shared culture and our shared values. And we haven't really said much about culture today, but it is so important. The culture which determines the way that our beliefs and our values, our norms, our understanding about a subject. So risk culture is what a group of people share, their shared beliefs, values, understanding and knowledge about risk. And that will determine how we approach the risks in our mega projects. But not just risk, it's our corporate culture to do with the value of people, to do with our ethics and our integrity, to do with the way that we treat the general public, the way that we treat our other stakeholders. These are key parts of the corporate culture. If it's right, then it allows that flexibility and resilience because we know who we are. So we have that strong sense of corporate identity, grounded values and strong stakeholder engagement. These are things broader than the project, which set the context for project flexibility and resilience. So if we wanted a single word that described all of these things, it might be this word, agility, by which I don't mean agile methodologies like DSTM and Scrum and so on. I mean the agility which allows you to change in response to the situation. Something happens that you weren't expecting, what are you going to do? And agility says we've got the flexibility, we can cope with this, and the resilience to bounce back. And that's what all of these things are aiming to do. And I think what Jeremy said with a lot of the positioning of HS2 is about creating these sort of capabilities within the project and within the team and the wider organisation. So it is possible when we get emergent risks, when we get black swans that suddenly fly in and land on our lake and they start to affect us, if we've got this level of flexibility and resilience built in to our complex mega projects or to any other project, then we can have continuity management in our projects that says, well, we thought something might happen. We didn't think it was going to be this. But now that something has happened, we know what we're going to do. And we have that spare capacity, we have the attitude, we have the people and the resources, the processes to cope with it. Let's get on with it, with a focus on the objectives. So these are doable things. What we're doing is moving from the big worry of mission impossible and all these horrible things like volatility and complexity and systemicity and interrelatedness and so on, which are too hard to get your head around. Of a problem that is too big for one person to describe, too big for one person to hold in their head. This is the challenge of a complex mega project. And then we have to manage it and make it work. We have to manage the risks on it and we have to deliver the benefits and the value. We can only do it if we have real actionable things that we can work on. And breaking it down to these kinds of aspects and the things that Jeremy was sharing this morning makes it possible. You could do all of these things. Maybe not overnight, but if you knew what you were aiming at, you could get there, couldn't you? Of course you could. So if we can't control the tides, we can learn to build better boats. Why don't we have a boat that will survive whatever comes? Noah's Ark or whatever, Kon-Tiki or something. We can't control the tides. We actually can't. Stuff will happen, particularly in complex mega projects, because they are inherently ambiguous and unpredictable. But if we've got a good enough boat, it'll be fine. And I think there's a problem very often with the way we think about projects and project management. We often think about projects like on the left. So somebody talked about, if your project goes off track. That's entirely the wrong thinking. We think that a project is like the train on the track. The track is the plan, and we've got a starting destination. We've got an end terminus. We've got some stations along the way, which might be our milestones or our gates. We've got a timetable that says we leave here and we arrive here. We've got staff, the driver and the guard, if you have a guard, and the person with the trolley with the food and so on. So we know exactly. You can predict. Here's the timetable. Start here, finish here. Here's my project. How many people's project is like that? I don't think so. It's like this, isn't it? It's like sailing across a small piece of rough water on a small boat. And you could see your target on the other side of the bay, and you could probably draw a straight line on a map that says from here to there and work out your average speed and say this is when we're going to get there, and then you set sail. And then the wind blows and a jet ski comes across in front of you and somebody gets seasick and a rope breaks and, all sorts of stuff happens. And you have to tack. And you say, oh, I'm going this way. Oh, well, I want to get over there. That's fine because now I'll go this way and I'll correct. Oh, I wanted to go, and now I've overcorrected. Now I need to go this way. And that's how sailing works, isn't it? Not by going in a straight line from here to there. And that's what our projects are like. That's why we need flexibility and resilience. That's why we need agility within our projects, in our processes, in our people, in our contracts, in our technical solutions, and in our organisations. That's what it's for, to enable us to sail the boat from A to B, because it sure as eggs isn't like a train. Is it? No, David. Okay, now we've talked about getting from mission impossible to mission accomplished. And I just want to put a little warning in here. If we say the words mission accomplished, who does that make you think of? Bush, exactly. George Bush, on the 1st of May 2003, declared victory in Iraq with this, on the USS Abraham Lincoln. We've succeeded, mission accomplished, well done chaps, so we've done it. And of course we all know they hadn't, and they probably still haven't. So there is a danger of declaring mission accomplished too soon on complex mega projects. You're halfway through, you spent half the money, you spent half the time, you've done half the deliverables, we're right on track. Oh, really? Earned value would tell you perhaps something different. The danger is that we think we've got there when we've still got a long way to go, or even part of the way to go, because stuff can happen right at the last minute. So what we need to do is to recognise with true agility, we might still require changing our preferred future. It might be that halfway through in a complex mega project, everything changes so much with emergent threats and opportunities, you have to point somewhere else completely different. And that's part of your flexibility and resilience. In order to create this value and these benefits, now that the competition has done this and the regulators change like this and our technological innovation process has thrown up this, could we achieve those goals in a different and better way? And maybe we can define a better preferred future. So organisational agility is not just about getting to your defined end in the best possible way, it's about getting the best end as well. So don't declare mission accomplished too soon. Make sure that we keep our eye on the ultimate goal, on the benefits, the value and the outcomes, because that's what our complex mega projects are there to deliver. So, just a few final thoughts, and I've caught up a little bit of time. Managing risk in complex mega projects. The first thing is we use clear objective setting techniques to define our preferred future, and then futures thinking to identify the range of possible futures. Then we use the analytical techniques of risk management to analyse what futures are probable, and the proactive response development type risk management to change the future. And that involves with traditional risks, typical risks, using our traditional risk management approach, which we're all skilled in, but also for emergent risks, thinking about project continuity management. How do we keep going if something really significant, good or bad, happens that we weren't expecting? And that involves flexibility and resilience, or agility, right across the board. It is possible. A number of the best organisations and projects do this. This is not just for complex mega projects. This is for all projects. We should all have, like all organisations, should have a business continuity plan and practice it. As projects, we should also have a project continuity plan and practice it, because you know something is going to happen on your project. So it is possible to move from mission impossible through to mission accomplished. And we don't do it with the superhero and the special effects and all the rest of it. We do it through a thought-through professional approach to managing risk. So I hope you found that interesting and useful at the end of the day, not just for those of you who are working in the complex mega projects, but for all of us who have the challenge of delivering value to our stakeholders. It's for us to be as flexible and resilient as we can in the face of both the emergent risks as well as managing traditional risks in the standard way. I hope you found that useful. That's all I want to say. Thank you.